I've got one, but I don't need a microphone. So there is some chance that we will be rid of the grifter in chief in a year. And as a parent, as a teacher, I know that, damage to kids is often a lifetime legacy, and not just their lifetime, but generational. But I am curious, what policies could be reversed or halted or stopped, and how quickly might that occur? Certainly, I remember Gabi and I we were down at the SeaTac airport the weekend after Trump got elected, halting one of his policies. But what would that look like a week later, a month later?
So I would say, first of all, thank God that the courts are still protecting us, because we have a recent decision that is ordering the U.S. government to pay the mental health care of the families and children that are part of a class action for families that were separated. That's not going to cover all of them. So first and foremost, we have to identify and we have to provide services. In terms of policies that need to be changed, there literally is not a family separation policy that is in effect now. So they are misinterpreting an existing policy. And that is an easy one to fix. It's the damage that's been done that's going to take much more time and effort. And that's going to require, in my view, individual support for families and kids. Because what I've seen is it's going to be, well, it's long lasting, as you said, it's lifetime. Stephen?
We could increase the number of refugees. It was over 100,000 in the Obama administration, while at the same time he was known as the deporter-in-chief. So it's not like compassionate migration has ever found a foothold in the policymakers, but still we come from the depths to sunlight. And as well, there's a number of DACA and DAPA can be reinstated rather than fought to terminate them in the courts for dreamers. So there's a number of things that could be done right away. And actually that's a lot of the basis of the Trump administration arguments, which is trying to basically say, I, as the executive, can do just about anything I want until I'm stopped by the courts or Congress, and Congress is always stymied on immigration policy. Somebody stop me. And as of yet, almost no one has.
Yeah. And I would say, just to follow that up, that actually, political action around congressional action is an important first step, because a lot of the administrative changes, they're not hard. The hard one is actually addressing the Byzantine, the immigration system that we have, and that requires congressional action.
We have one question here.
Hi, thank you so much. My question is about the various countries where the migrants are coming from, through Mexico, through Central America. Which ones are the most likely for people to be fleeing at any given, or is there kind of a cascade effect? Because you talk about Venezuela, Nicaragua, Guatemala. Is there any kind of statistics on where more people are coming from than others?
All right, so there are different reasons that people are fleeing. We used to talk about economic refugees, right, because poverty was driving them. Then we talked about refugees because of the drug cartels and the violence. And now we're talking about climate refugees. And so I think it's important to understand it's not a particular country's problem. We can't point at can't point at Honduras and say, oh look, they're doing better today. because the situation is growing exponentially worse for everyone as people are being displaced by those three factors: poverty, violence and gangs and climate change. And those things aren't going away anytime soon. And therefore there isn't kind of a shift that says, oh, there's improvement that we can look at in one country that could spread to somewhere else. We have to take it on as a continent.
And the common thread of all of those sources of migration, which doesn't seem readily apparent to many, is the global north, and the United States has a hand in prompting all of those migrations. And so if we're talking about trying to quell or ease the pressures of migration, it has to start with policies in the United States.
I also want to add that with all these problems with climate and people being taken, whatever, that there's also something we don't often talk about. There's the oligarchy of every country ends up in the United States. So it's very important. I talk with my students a lot about social class and looking at things intersectionally, because we cannot equate, the stories that you told us, Arlene, with the experiences of people that just want to live in the United States. And there is a number of those people that if you feel unsafe, or you say you feel unsafe, there's a lot of that too. That there's an upper class that feels very unsafe, and we need to also put that in the pot.
That's true.
I just want to mention that I also lived on the border before moving back to this area. And I remember back in 2006, George Bush having the military come down there and militarizing the border. So this is not a new development by this president. However, what is a new development is seeing the social or ethnic cleansing that he's trying to establish with the Steve Miller's policies, or whatever his name is. He's doing it through different methods. Less refugees, militarizing the border, and stricter immigration policies. My biggest concern is that DACA is going to go away because of the makeup of the Supreme Court. And once that happens, I don't know what's going to happen to our communities.
And even President Clinton, a Democrat in the office, was a supporter, the fervent supporter of border enforcement and infrastructure. Operation Gatekeeper in San Diego, and Operation Hold the Line in El Paso. So really, border enforcement and xenophobes, they cross political borders and boundaries too.
Hello. Yes, I also wanted to say that for those of us who have families on the border, we know that there are many interventions and that are not reported in the news. That, I have family in Juarez and friends that will find American tanks in the Central Plaza often, right? And we don't hear about those things. So this relationship, going back and forth and just going into Mexico whenever they want, have been happening for a long time.
And I just want to add one thing to that too. So I agree that we're not talking about one political party. The terrorism that is being perpetrated on people of color, on brown families. I mean, I don't know if you saw last week that ICE had an armored vehicle, military vehicle in Queens, and drove it through an immigrant community. That's not an accident, right? I mean, that's a message. And so whether it's in Juarez or it's Queens, we have an issue that we've got to be dealing with our government and how our government is acting on our behalf. That's my main thing. They're not doing this in isolation, right? They're saying this is what the American people want.
Other questions?
Yes.
Different
So,
topic?
I think I'd like you to talk about Muslim and Mexican discrimination in Trump's America and the potential for solidarity for these communities and resisting together, because I see similarities between Muslim ban and what's happening in the border. I see similarities between Muslims being equated with terrorists and Mexicans being equated with rapists.
There's a lot of similarities, as you mentioned. If I gave a talk once about our border policy is like a person and what the characteristics of that person would be, and it was a really it was a person who none of us would ever aspire to be. It was a person who was racist. It was a person who was classist. It was a person who was bigoted against, in history, Catholics and Muslims and others. It was a person who practiced ableism. It was on so many grounds. Everything that we would claim as a country that preaches equality to be above, but that's what our immigration policy has been since day one. So sometimes when I hear, like I heard tonight, about these immigration policies are anti-American, some of me pushes back and says, well, actually, this is what America is all of these isms and phobias. And it's just being enacted and reenacted.
And supported by men.
And I would say, to your point about sort of organizing and solidarity, I think that, Stephen, you made the point earlier tonight that poor white people could not see the economic solidarity, right? But surely immigrants of all different communities can see solidarity in the kind of terrorism that they're experiencing. And I think there's a lot of organizing that can happen around that. I know that there's a lot that's happening in Chicago right now that's exactly on the point that you're making, where they are organizing communities together around the shared trauma and the shared deprivation that they're experiencing, and trying to eliminate those differences that people see. And so, a lot of that I think comes from, small groups coming together. And, the fact that you're raising it suggests to me that, that might be something you might want to be working on and thinking about.
Yes, Jasmine.
Hello. Hi. My question is just could you elaborate more on the reunification process that families tend to go to? And then also, can you share what you might know about ICE and how there's rumors that it's been feeding into human trafficking organizations, and I just want to know if you could speak on that.
So I don't know anything about the human trafficking, but the reunification process, this is where a lot of work is being done by the Catholic Church and other charitable organizations. The funding is coming from donations. So one of the things that they're doing, for instance, is collecting everyone's travel miles, right? So everyone has all these built up miles, with different airlines, and they're collecting those to be able to pay the travel expenses to be able to reunify families. They're doing this on shoestring budgets. And so it is the collective work of a number of charitable entities that have been, I guess, they're getting,
I think you shut down the webcam.
Yes,
you
did.
did.
Everything.
Yes, you did.
okay, I'll talk loud.
Yeah, and also we can continue these conversations over there. I'm
Oh, that's
afraid
true.
that the food will not be touched.
Okay,
So
that's
I
a good segue
I
then.
think we should move over.
Thank
to
you all.
take